With that, we'll begin the session. Just a few words from me by way of introduction. The future of mobility is very much about fair, safe, clean and accessible public transportation, which is gender-friendly modes of movement and non-motorised mobility systems leading to or springing from good urban mobility planning. And this is all about, the buzzwords in there are all about sustainability, about accessibility, and I think probably most of all about planning. These sorts of outcomes are not what are achieved by chance. So with that, can we go on to our first speaker, Mr. Roland Race. Now I apologise if my Anglo-Saxon pronunciation mangles some of your names, but it's the best I can do.
Roland Race.
So, the Mayor of Strasbourg.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, it doesn't work, but not a problem. My English is not good enough, so I have to speak French.
Nobody's perfect.
It's possible. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is perfect. You are right, dear Jean-Pierre. He speaks very well French and very well English and a lot of languages. Alors, il me revient d'introduire cette session avec un peu de retard. Je voudrais dire d'emblée que les questions de mobilité sont aujourd'hui des questions centrales, très importantes. Elles l'étaient déjà, elles le sont encore plus aujourd'hui. Pourquoi? Parce que pendant longtemps, on a raisonné uniquement sur les politiques de transport et de mobilité, comme si on pouvait régler les problèmes à partir de l'offre de transport. Ce n'est pas exact. Le transport s'intègre dans un urbanisme, dans un modèle de développement urbain. Et lorsque, au début des années 90, à Strasbourg, nous sommes intéressés aux questions de mobilité, on a fait comme tout le monde. On a été centré là-dessus. On a construit un tramway, on a augmenté l'offre de transport public, on a essayé de réduire la pénétration automobile dans les villes, à toutes choses qui ont été largement faites par la suite. Mais nous nous sommes rendus compte assez vite que le transport n'existait pas en lui-même. Il existe par rapport à son environnement. Et d'ailleurs, il est très différent selon les environnements. Si on est dans un environnement urbain, dense, central, ce n'est pas la même chose que d'être dans le périurbain ou d'être à la campagne. Donc il faut tenir compte du contexte.
Evident today that questions of transport and mobility are directly related to urbanization, beg your pardon. We can work in two ways. In the first way is to say there is a request for mobility, to go to work, for entertainment, for holiday, all kinds of reasons, and we are going to meet those demands. And the second way is to say, is all mobility applicable? Is there mobility that is chosen, or is there imposed mobility? For example, those who live 15, 20 kilometers outside of a city that do not necessarily want to live in a rural area or in the countryside, but it's because it is a more affordable accommodation, so needs to spend money on mobility. So this is kind of required mobility. When we talk about the right to mobility, we need to have this distinction in our minds. All mobilities are not necessarily chosen. They are sometimes, very often imposed, and this would be to avoid a more managed or balanced development of the territory, for example. So to develop the territory is also very important to the issue at hand. Whatever the case may be, at the UCLG we have set up a community of practice, which I have presided for a number of years together with the mayor of Jakarta, and which today is more than ever necessary. It is a community of practice that consists of bringing together or sharing within our diversity, but all of the experiences and all our innovation with regard to transport and innovation and transport, and much more in an urban area, because we bring together experts, we discuss certain issues, and we provide an overview of the innovations which are developed across the world. So this community of practice is made up, in my opinion, is of importance, of a great importance. It's unnecessary. We need it, even if problems are different between one country and another, or between one continent and another. The objectives are all the same, and we know them. It's about facility of mobility, and we need to try also to have it as little as intrusive as possible, and to have as less of an impact on the environment as possible, and to become a sustainable way, a sustainable mobility. So it is easy to say, of course, but it's more difficult to do. And I remember in the 1990s in Strasbourg, when we launched this new mobility policy, we had opposition. There was skepticism from the people who were saying, but he's crazy, Ries. We already have a problem moving about in our cars in Strasbourg. And now he wants to include a surface tramway. Who is going to use it? And then we will have even less space for the car, and we will have even less place to move about. So it seems a kind of logical reasoning, isn't it? But even if we are not looking at the future, with regard to consultation, all of consultation is important, and I will end on that. It is our role, and us as professionals and technicians, to make people understand that what we are trying to develop with regard to a mobility policy, it's not against them, but it's for the greater public interest. In the 1990s, they said to me, "But you know your tramway. Why don't you put it in the countryside, but provide us with more parking spaces? This is what we need." That is what they were saying. And in fact, it wasn't easy. It was very often, we had very difficult meetings. And of course, there was a political opposition, because that is part of democracy. But there was especially some kind of skepticism from people in good faith who were saying, but we can't do that. You need to provide more parking spaces. But it's the contrary that we need to do. We can't do that in the center of town, because then we attract even more cars. And then we have a negative influence on mobility. So this is as an introduction. And right, as far as my experience is concerned, it's more than 30 years old, I'm afraid. But we've been dealing with it in Strasbourg for a long time. But if I can summarize, let's not take this issue of mobility on its own. We need to integrate it within an urban policy and urban development. And secondly, we need to take into account all of the innovations, and the digital area is there, transport on demand, sharing of transport, etc. All of these things that are available, that have opened up, and that we need to explore today to be able to have sustainable mobility and inclusive sustainable mobility. This is as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
From Strasbourg. Now we will go immediately on to our next speaker. You'll see, if you've looked at the list of speakers, that Mr. Fikile Mbalula, the Minister of Transport from South Africa, was to speak. He can't make it. But standing in for him is Mr. Mzwandile Masina, who is the Executive Mayor of Ekurhuleni Metropolitan. Can I invite you to speak? Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panel. As you know, that the city of Ekurhuleni, that's where we have most of the mode of transport in the Republic. The OR Tambo International Airport is based on our space, which is the biggest international airport here in the Republic of South Africa, but possibly in the entire continent. We carry about over just 21 million passengers per annum, domestically, internationally, and regionally, as one of the mode of transport that has been used to consolidate the movement of goods and people around. The issue of freight and logistic becomes central in the work that is done at the level of the international airport, and I think that a lot of work has been done by the South African government to consolidate capabilities around the aerospace. We're building a lot of capabilities around the airport. So the issue of the aerospace has become central to the transport mode in the country, but also the second area is around the rail network. Recently, the South African government has made billions of investments to build the new locomotives in our metropolitan. They've invested just over 51 billion rand to build the new trains that are going to be used to replace the old rolling stock in the Republic. And that project is gaining momentum, and we should be having our first few trains that are going to replace the old stock that has been there, and we're quite confident that it will help to change the mode of transport in the Republic. And we continue to use our traditional transport like taxi industry, which is still predominant in all the areas, because geographically the movement of people is quite central to the work that is being done by the South African government. You have quite a number of people, majority of the people staying in the periphery of the CBDs, and they need to be moving towards those areas for work purposes. So the taxi industry still becomes the backbone of the industry that is required to ensure the movement of people, especially to workplaces. And there are a lot of discussions that are being held between government, private sector, in particular around the role of transport in the economy as a whole. You will know that one of the issues that is being raised is how do we ensure that the transport mode that are provided by government in the main are safe, they are reliable, because one of the conversations we're having with the private sector is to ensure that if they were to create a shift system, they need to make sure that the transport is reliable, is safe, and those people will be getting to the mode of transport are guaranteed that will arrive home safely and so on. So those discussions are quite advanced, and we're quite happy that we're beginning to see now the new mode of transport that is being launched by the South African government, especially in all the metropolitan, and I think we're one of the last metros to roll what is called a rapid bus transport system, the BRT, which basically is beginning to connect the movement of people between their places where they stay to places of work and so on. So all those combined mode of transport requires that the built infrastructure network is such that it's responsive. There is a huge project around the expansion of the international airport. Our road network is being expanded, even though we have these outstanding issues about the e-tolls and so on, but the road network in the country is able to connect. We've got interchange that connect to almost all the major freeways in the country, and our road network is quite advanced. And these are the issues that we're grappling with in the country, and we're quite confident that the integrated transport system, including what has been launched at the provincial for the first speed train in Gauteng, moves between the three metros, which is Johannesburg, Tshwane, and Ekurhuleni towards the airport, which is a most efficient transport mode for those who are mobile, to go to different cities. And we think that All those mode of transport combined, they are giving us like a cutting edge as the country to really begin to ensure that there is a safer movement of people and goods. But I think where the country is lacking, and we slowly have to build on those capabilities, is around the capacity around freight and logistics, because at the international airport, we no longer have the required space to ensure that we can move goods around. So there are discussions about what are the alternative regional airports that could be used as a freight logistics to complement that is being done. And that is why, for instance, as a city, we have launched what is called the Aerotropolis Master Plan, which is basically going to focus around consolidating our views around freight and logistics, but also building them as an industry that is going to support the economic backbone of the country. So these are some of the developments that are taking place in South Africa, which we would like to have conversation, but also I believe that there's quite a number of other opportunities that we could draw from other countries. Hence, we're happy to be engaging here around the mode of transport and the mobility that are there to try and ensure that we better the lives of our people within the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Messina. Now we'll move on to one of the later speakers who has some pressing engagement. So can I invite Ms. Mariana Flores Meillan, Executive Director of Institutional Representation at CDMX, and invite you to speak.
Thank you.
I don't think this... Try that again.
Hello? Yeah? Good. So thank you for the invitation. Of course, as you can imagine, Mexico City has a huge challenge in mobility. Being a city where 9 million people live, but where we have a 22 million metropolitan area, there are some technical problems at the moment. We cannot hear the speaker. Okay, good. So, Mexico City has a huge challenge on mobility. We are 9 million people living in the city, but we are a metropolitan area of 22 million people. Then we have more than 30 million trips a day, going from the city center to the peripheral areas, but also inside the city. So that is a huge, huge challenge for us. So thinking about mobility is really important. Our chief of government has set a 6 action line plan for her administration, and one of those important and priorities for the city is mobility. And how are we trying to deal with this challenge? First, the idea is to integrate all the different systems that we have in Mexico City. We have the BRT system, we have a subway, we have electric buses, we have a lot of infrastructure, but it was not integrated before. So the idea, first of all, is to integrate all these services. And one of the main, because of this session, I guess, one of the most interesting things, and also of the working group on mobility, is really how to think on mobility as a way of improving sustainable development in our cities. So for Mexico City, one of the priorities is to reduce the emissions of CO2 caused by transportation. How do we do that? First, reducing polluting trips. Second, changing to more sustainable mobility. And third, improving the existing technologies. So the first one, reducing the most polluting trips, of course, the first one has to do with reducing the use of private cars. In Mexico, we still have this vision that the car is kind of a status thing. So then we have to do this pedagogical work on saying to the population, hey, it's not a status thing. Then you have a lot of other options to move in the city, so let's go for that. That includes, for example, talking to schools and the private sector so they can facilitate employees and students to move in better ways, using buses, using public transportation and not private cars. Also having some restricted areas for the car circulation, and also programs for car sharing. And this reduction of polluting trips also includes, as Sir mentioned before, the delivery cars, that we have to have better strategies for logistics and also better quality of the cars that are delivering our products in the city. So the second challenge, or the second way to face this challenge, as I said, is changing for more sustainable trips. During this administration, we're going to change public transportation infrastructure. That means making better our BRT system and also making more kilometers on that. That also means we're launching a new cable car system. As Mr. Ries said, it's kind of adapting to the environment and adapting to the territory. So in Mexico City we have some hills and we are introducing cable car system. Then it's also kind of retrofitting the buses, the bus system we have already. And also very important, the use of bicycle. We have right now a really interesting and important public system of bicycle, but it's mostly concentrated in the central part of the city. The idea is to move that also to the peripheries, building 600 kilometers of infrastructure, bike lanes mainly. Also having 16 huge parkings for bicycles and increasing the number of public bicycles on the streets. And the third one, which is improving the existing technology, that means going for cleaner transportation. It means not only bringing electrics and hybrids, but also the ones that are already circulating on the streets, bringing better technology to that so they cannot pollute as much as they do right now. As I said, electromobility and hybrids are a key part of the strategy that Mexico City has developed right now. And also, again, coming to this improving of the existing technology, the delivery systems. Of course, and most important, the last mile. We have to improve the way last mile delivery is made. So that's something we're putting a lot of effort on that. And finally, I want to say that in this working group, for me, it's really important, and for Mexico City, it's important, the partnerships. The partnerships we do with other cities, of course, exchanging experiences with the private sector. Even if Mexico City is investing a lot, public investment in this, we always need a company of private sector and also of financial institutions. And let's not forget, it's in Mexico City it's evident, but it's also important to remember that we have to take into account the metropolitan perspective. So we cannot think on these policies if we do not consider the way we interact and we collaborate with other municipalities around us. So thank you for the invitation, and I love to be part of this working group. Thank you.
Ms. Mayen, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Dionisio Gonzalez, an Advocacy and Outreach Director. Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for UITP being here with you today. Thanks again for the invitation, and thanks again for all this work we have developed together with UCLG Community of Practice. First, allow me to excuse Mr. Calvet, the UITP president, who is not able to be here with you today as he would have liked. We would like to talk, or the topic that we have been proposed to talk about is about multimodality and intermodality, which is a key word in UITP DNA. Let me very briefly tell you that UITP is the Global Association of Sustainable Urban Mobility. with 17 regions, 17 offices in different regions, 1,600 members in 100 countries. Our members are public transport stakeholders from authorities, operators, researchers, industry, and they are all the sustainable urban mobility actors. So they are from conventional public transport, metros, buses, tramways, to scooters, bikes, etc. And we as a sector, we are also evolving. We are embracing more and more newcomers, new mobility services, working together with, let's say, the conventional public transport sector, the conventional public transport providers, because they all can play a key role if we manage them, let's say, in a smart way. They all can contribute if we manage them in a smart way, meaning that they should be part of a more wider sustainable strategy, not only mobility, but urban sustainable urban strategy based on 4 pillars, if I may say that. One is having this long-term vision, as Mr. Rie mentioned before, a vision that should be shared between the different levels of the administration at national, regional, and local level, but also within the different departments in the same city. It's true that the best mobility strategy is a good land use strategy. The second pillar is the governance and the right institutional framework. Do we have this in-house? Do we have these skills in-house? In one of the studies that we developed 1 year ago, the Urban Mobility Innovation Index, we found that most of the barriers to develop sustainable solutions in cities has to do, of course, first with the lack of strategy, but second, with the lack of proper regulation. We have very rigid regulation that don't allow the cities to develop efficient solutions. Third pillar is, no doubt, the stable funding framework. And this is something that you know very well, because usually you get the responsibilities and the competencies from the national government, but you never get the money, you never get the budget. And the fourth one, which is very relevant for us, and we are very proud of our partnership with UCLG, is a strong political leadership. Having a champion for the project, it makes a big difference between a failure or a success in many, many places. So, kind of summing up, no magic recipes in mobility, because mobility doesn't have one single solution. It's true that mobility is becoming more and more complex, but it's also true that we are having now much more data. Thanks to digitalization, we are getting more and more data. If we manage to transform this data into knowledge, into information, and then into knowledge, we will advance quite rapidly. Of course, all public and private stakeholders are welcome to work in these multimodal integrated public transport systems. And one key element could be, and we have been discussing about this before, mobility as a service and the shared economy. Of course, this is relevant, but it will be only relevant if it's supported, let's say, in the public transport as the main backbone. It will be the only way. You can play with all the other modes as a complementary mode to public transport, because this is not a question of technology. It's a question of geometry. It's a question of how we distribute the urban space. Are we developing cities for people, or are we developing cities for cars? And this could be kind of our main message. Let's be creative. Let's be able to develop the right partnerships. And thank you very much again for your invitation, and looking forward to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, can I just say that we are skipping through this quite quickly, but should we have time at the end of the session, I will open it up for questions from the floor, so you'll get that opportunity then. Our next speaker is Mr. Irion Valiage, the Mayor of Tirana. Welcome, and over to you.
Am I good? I'm good. It's exciting to be here, but I wanted to share a bit the story of Tirana. I come from Tirana, Albania. I don't know how many of you have been. It's just across from Italy. And one fan over there. The rest of you who haven't come, you are not perfect. So you should come and join me and Roland on his next visit. But I wanted to share a story about the country I grew in. The country I grew in was the North Korea of Europe. That was the synonym for Albania at the time, the most isolated country in Europe. You'd be shot for coming in, you'd be shot for going out. But one of the things that did not exist was private property, including cars. So the whole city of Tirana at the time, when I was growing up, and until 10 years old, when the Berlin Wall fell, only had 17 cars, 17. So only the members of the Politburo and the chiefs of the army. Everybody else just walked or rode the bus or on a bike. And then we toppled the dictator, but we needed a new thing to worship, right? So the new thing to worship became the car. It was a trophy. You go as an immigrant to Italy, you bring a Fiat, or to Germany, you bring a Mercedes, or to France, and you bring a Citroën, mostly to show your neighbor that you're not a poor commie anymore, because now you have a car, and this is your medallion of having escaped. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because we went from a city of 200,000 people to a city of 1 million, and to a city of 17 cars to a city of 200,000 cars. Why do I want to bring this up? Because I think before we talk about geometry and mobility and design, first we need to talk about the values. And my good friend Dionisio concluded on a very good question. Why are we designing cities? Are we designing cities for cars or for people? So sometimes I tend to think that the most difficult infrastructure program for a mayor is not a boulevard, is not a tram, it's not a metro. It's 10 centimeters from here to here. Because I think this is the space that we're really struggling to change, and this is where all the dogma, where all of our values, where all our beliefs, our voting records, our party membership, our paranoia, our phobia, all of it is sheltered right here in this 10 centimeters. So I think it's really important to deal with this culturally, and I think Mariana made a very good point. We don't address this enough in school already. And so kids grow up and saying that, you know, one way to achieve a status is to get a really nice fancy car. But let's think about it for one moment. We've been driving cars only for the last 100 years. For 2 or 3 million years, fish used to swim, birds used to fly, and humans used to walk, and sometimes, if they wanted to catch food, run. So our state of nature for millions of years has been walking and running, not sitting in a metal box. And I think we fail to address that because we think, oh, it's so impossible. And then we forget that in our DNA, we're walkers and runners. We're not drivers. And then we get inundated by all this innovation. They say autopiloted cars. It still means a car on the street. Elon Musk can come up with all kinds of inventions, but it will still be 5 square meters on the street that a metal box will take, whether with or without a driver. So I think that's not really addressing the question. So here's a few remarks, and I think a few urban myths that we need to break as we discuss this. So one urban myth is that when you start putting up these bike lanes and stuff, the first thing that comes to mind is we're not Holland, we're not Copenhagen. And you say, yes, but if you look at the story, Holland and Denmark were not Holland and Denmark 50 years ago. The car industry coming out of the Second World War was busy making tanks and ships, and now they needed to push cars for every household, you know, hopefully 1 or 2 for each member of the family. So it's a pretty recent thing. So the generation of people who remembered what it was before is still alive, and we can share this knowledge. And we have found out that even in our cities, you know, people said, oh, Mr. Mayor, but it's not Copenhagen and Amsterdam. I said, yeah, funny enough. But people in our town also know how to bike. And apparently, if you do these bike lanes in a pop-up message, you don't take forever to brainstorm, then it really works. And people show up. I mean, you build it and they will come. You know the formula. And one of the reasons I say pop-up, because you can brainstorm things to death. I mean, what we do in this conference is we brainstorm. I'm a tough believer that we need to try-storm. So we need to do more trying than hoping that after brainstorming we get the right solution. There will never be a perfect solution. But by try-storming, we prove something. If a bike lane doesn't work in the side, you put it on the center. And if it doesn't work in the center, you put it, intertwined. So there are tons of ways that we can become and we can learn from these experiences. Second, I think there needs to be an international criminal court for designers, because some of these people really have it wrong. Architects and urban planners, no, it doesn't work. And I'll tell you why. In my city, 20% of the people own a car. It's a lot, it's 200,000 people, but it's still 20% of the population. But taxes are paid from everyone. Bikers pay property tax, walkers pay property tax, bus riders pay property tax. So how in the hell did we end up with cities that are designed in such a way that 95% of public space, which is roads and intersections, are used by only 20% of the population? Where's democracy here? There's no democracy here. So I think we need to bring democratic design. So we've been piloting with a few projects. If you design a boulevard where you look at the property tax payment and you say, so 65%, walk. So why don't we, instead of calling them sidewalks, why don't we call them main walks? Because already when you say sidewalk, you're discriminating. You say, you get pushed. Why? They're the majority. Why are they sidewalkers? They're main walkers. So once we decide to design with this concept in mind, and space is divided based on their contributions to city tax, then you get a whole different result. Then you get more space for walkers, and they tend to be out, rather than walking like goats in a little trottoir, sidewalk, where the cars are trying to bully everyone out of the public space. Third, I think with design, is that we're designing cities like all the inhabitants are 30 years old and very athletic, right? Like it's like a hurdle competition. And I think there's some few great initiatives out there that I think we all need to take a look at. And I look at my good friend Anibal Gaviria, one of his compatriots, Gil Peñalosa, built this group called 880 Cities. Because we find that children and the elderly are becoming disappearing species, endemic species in our cities. So if these are the species that we try not to see in the city, because the cities have become like Spartan adventures to cross the street, then of course we think they don't exist. So we only design for the healthy 30-year-olds. But if we design with these two endemic species, just like if you want to save a rhino, or if you want to save some sort of an elephant, you try to design these shelters in a way that it saves their species. So if you want to save children and adults, design with them in mind. Another great group, it's called the Bernard van Leer Foundation in the Netherlands, and they have an initiative called Urban 95. So they make their designers and their architects design sitting on their knees, because 95 centimeters is what the height of a 3-year-old is. And if you design the city from this distance, things look a lot different than when you are 2 meters high and design with that in mind. Fourth, cars need to be charged more. I have fights with people every day on social media and everything. Oh, Mr. Mayor, but before you became mayor, parking was free. I said, no, it wasn't. No, it was free. No, I said it wasn't, because we only have 4,000 on-surface parking places, and we have 200,000 cars. So it was only free for the first 4,000 who arrived and left their cars there for 20 hours. The rest had to spend time, had to cause traffic, has to pollute, and they use gas. So I think we need to challenge the concept of parking. Parking is not a human right. Parking is the act of renting 5 square meters of city space from either the city or a private owner. But you are not entitled to parking. It has a cost because you're renting this space from the public domain. And I think sometimes a lot of us mayors, of course we want to be re-elected. But unless you confront these people, then you'll end up losing everything. And I think you need to confront a lot of the populism, a lot of the urban myths that come. And I think if this is matched with democratic design and this 10-centimeter cultural change, we're going to do pretty amazing things in cities, not only with bikes and buses. You know, when I was in your last event 4 or 5 years ago, electric buses were north of €1 million. Now electric buses are being produced as less than a Euro 5, Euro 6 diesel. So in China, they're producing photons now for 250K. So even for poor cities like ours, not only for Strasbourg, which is a wealthy city, it's now considerable to go to electric, because it has become affordable through years and technology has moved on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very stimulating. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Esteban Galuzzi, the Undersecretary for Transportation and Traffic for the City of Buenos Aires. Welcome.
Number 3. Okay. You guys hear me? Yes, I think it works. So first of all, thank you for UCLG and UITP for organizing this panel and having me here. It's an honor to be here with such distinguished panelists. I want to talk to you about, since we've been talking about the car and how we get rid of the car, I want to tell you how we're doing that in Buenos Aires. And we started by analyzing, why is it that people use cars? And it's quite amazing. If you look at it, it's an extremely convenient mode of transport because it will take you from anywhere to anywhere, and it's always available any time of day, and you will travel very comfortably. For a very low marginal price, many times a price that is not even explicit, and for a very high investment, which is the purchase of the car. So they said, okay, well, we got to work on this paradigm so that people will not use cars, and especially on the first two, which are the advantages. It's very, very convenient and it's very cheap to use. Well, at least implicitly, very cheap to use. So on the first thing, on how do we, provide everybody with an alternative to a car, so that they don't have to buy a car, and so that for every trip they want to make, they have the best option available. And we have to remember that even though we all love public transportation will not be able to solve every trip you want to make, especially trips, occasional trips, first and last mile trips, evening trips where you have to, go around with cargo if you're going to the supermarket or you're going on the weekend to a country house with vacation with your kids. Those are all trips where the car is probably going to be your best option. And that's many times the reason why people end up buying the car. And then because they bought the car, then they will use it for every other trip, even if they could make the trip in public transportation. So what we're doing in that respect, to allow people to use a car when they need a car, but have availability and access to other modes of transportation that are more convenient, is we're enabling the mobility as a service model, in which, first of all, we are passing the necessary regulations so that all the new forms of mobility that complement public transportation, somebody, I think, Dionisio, you said, public transportation is the backbone to any transportation system, but with today's new modes like the kick scooters or the bikes or the car sharing or the ride sharing or the carpooling, which are all new modes that have been enabled by technology, we can complement public transportation and make it so that every time somebody has to travel, they will have the right service available at their disposal. And to have that right service available, what they need is information that will allow them to decide. And therefore, we just passed, well, actually, we are in the process of passing a data transportation law, which will mandate every transport operator to publish the status of the data that describes the status of their operation in real time and standard format. We've already done that for all public transit. We've done it for kick scooters, and we'll be coming up with taxis, ride sharing, car sharing, and carpooling very soon, because we're going to have this law that everybody will have to open up the data that describes the status of their service. And the last part of mobility as a service is making it very easy to use, which is making the payments extremely easy. And for that, we're going to be passing a second law that will require all transport operators to open up their payment interfaces, so that with any means of payment, I can pay in all the different transportation services that I use. So just to give you as an example, if I were to use Google Maps to find what is the best alternative to go from A to B, I would have all the information there to make that decision, and then from Google Maps directly, I would have already loaded my credit card, and I would pay, if it's, let's say, a multimodal trip where I get the kick scooter to go to the station, then take the train, and when I get off the train, I get on a bike to finish my trip. I would pay for all those modes of transport directly from the phone without ever leaving Google Maps. So regulation, information, and payments, that's how we're working on enabling mobility as a service. And I got to tell you, we're already halfway there in terms of the regulation and the information. We still need to make progress with payments. The other piece is what the mayor was talking about, and with respect, the car being extremely convenient. And there's two things we're doing in that respect. The first one is the same thing that you're doing with parking. We're establishing a new parking system. We're going from 4,000 meter spaces to 90,000 meter spaces in the city, not allowing for people to park for more than 2 hours in most of the places so that we get the rotation going. and therefore, parking is available to city residents for the things that they need to do with the car, which is maybe go to the grocery store or go to the doctor or take their kids to the club, and use it for just a small period of time and shared by a lot of people, so that that fosters neighborhood economic activity and social activity. And then the last piece of the puzzle to make the car not so much convenient is making them pay for the externalities that they create, which are congestion and pollution. And in that respect, that is the most difficult of all the political decisions, is to implement congestion-based toll or fee for those people that still want to use a car when they could use a more efficient mode of transportation. That's a project that we have scheduled for the next to be implemented in the next 3 years. That goes along with the pollution as well. And it goes along with expanding the exclusion zones. In Buenos Aires, we have one of the biggest exclusion zones in the world, which we have been expanding geographically, and we're now expanding time-wise. And we will be creating new exclusion zones where cars cannot go in. So in a nutshell, there's many ways, or there's a lot of things you need to do to get rid of the car, but it's definitely possible. And the more we get people, the rich people that can have access to a car to use all the other modes, all the shared modes of transportation and public transportation, the more efficient the entire system becomes for everybody, the faster it becomes, and the more livable our cities will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Galluzzi. Our next speaker is Ms. Annalisa Palazzo, who's a councillor of the municipality of Sepagati. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. It's a great honor to be here and represent my city and the Italian delegation of ICRE. I am Annalisa Palazzo. I'm 31 years old and I come from Italy. I'm vice mayor of Cepagatti, a beautiful city in the province of Pescara along the Adriatic coast. Sorry if I read, but my English is not very well. Gender is a significant factor in accounting for differences in mobility and travel behavior. For women, mobility appears to be related to empowerment, access to opportunity, and independence. Recognition of links existing between gender, mobility, and sustainability has only recently begun to emerge in Europe, but in Italy there is not yet a real awareness on gender equality. At first, we have to analyze the differences between women and men mobility, depending from socioeconomic and demographic conditions. Study and understand women mobility means view the city through the eyes of women by involving local women groups and organized civil society, ensure the engagement of women all along the planning and the policy process, including consultation, monitoring and evaluation, collect sex disaggregated data and understand female travel patterns. Many women work part-time because spend much more time than men in houseworking and looking after children. Women travel less than men for work and travel more frequently for family management. For this reason, while men often display standard and linear travel patterns, home, work, home, women frequently have shorter travel patterns and more complex travel change. Home, escorting children and family members, work, shopping, and so on. According to statistics at European level, but also in Italy, women move less by car than men. 46% women, 58% men, and prefer use public transport and work more than men. In Italy, the same, women are more inclined than men to use bike, public transport, or work. local authority in Italy has two important instruments of mobility planning, called PAMP, Urban Mobility Plan, and PAT, Urban Traffic Plan. Italian citizens can use PAM and PAT to promote security in transport system and stimulate behavioral change with social media campaigns and educational programs. In Italy, there are some virtuous examples at local level. Cities like Parma, Turin, Milan, and Pescara also dedicated parking area reserved for pregnant women or families. Parking are near garage or station and easily accessible for women's safety. In other cities, introduce pink taxi, which allow women to travel by night in safety, and other cities reorganize the public services in order to facilitate work and family time. But I believe it's time for Italy to move from this single best practice and sporadic experience to a systemic vision of a national policy that finance and promote the sustainable mobility in according to gender equality. I think it's really important to ensure women's security in transport system. Design open public area with visibility, lighting and space reserved for women and children, facilitating women access to work and management position, and conduct educational programs at school on gender rules and safe mobility. In conclusion, we that represent local government, big and small cities, we all need to be more gender sensitive in our daily action, not only to help women, but all the society to grow up stronger. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Palozzo. Our last speaker is Mr. Jean-Pierre Elong Mimbasi, who is the UCLG Africa Secretary General and Ambassador for Creative Mobilities. Mr. Mbasi.
Je vais parler en français.
Right, I'm going to speak in French if you don't mind. So this session, the theme of the session is the future of mobility. 80% of the time in this session was spent on discussing the car in all of its forms, parking, access, management, and we know that it is not the future of mobility. So when you put 80% of your energy in what you don't want and you leave 20% for what you would like to imagine, well, then there is a problem. Because the future of mobility is not in the manner in which we conceive mobility today. And the future of mobility is not about the mobility of people only, it's also about the mobility of merchandise. A city transports a lot of goods, merchandise, and very often all our studies on the management of mobility forgets about the issue of mobility of goods. It's a lack of attention that we often see, because I have the impression that that part of mobility is ignored, disregarded. However, as was said earlier on by Mayor Rees, it's all part of planning. Or as the Anglo-Saxons say, as far as I can see, because we have disjointed these things, and because cars have known the biggest privilege to have influenced the manner in which we have built infrastructure. Because it's the constructors of cars that have influenced how we will design cities, for example. In Africa, 70% Look at Durban, look at the cities, look at Johannesburg. We just see highways and roads that actually consume a lot of money and we talk about justice here and inclusion. So somewhere, all of our thinking is actually influenced by the most powerful. And when we talk about the future of mobility, and that when we don't want to leave this kind of discussion by saying, right, if most of the people walk, then urban planning must focus on the mobility of pedestrians. If most people would be walking, then walking and the itineraries and routes of roads, of paths, etc., would have to be cultural adventures. It shouldn't be that transport be... It's like a weight. It shouldn't be a weight for everyone. Transport users, and the cities, it's extremely expensive transport. It can be much, much cheaper if we took into account the usage and the real usage. But we do have limitations with regard to specialized transport. We would want, for example, that if there's a fire somewhere, that the fire brigade could come. So if you have someone who is ill somewhere, you would want an ambulance to fetch someone. But those kinds of specialized transport modes are not part of the way we plan transport. So it would be, that was the second kind of topic that I've approached. So the third one is, today we make as if cities are islands, that they are not linked to the hinterland, that they act in isolation, that fundamentally, in fact, we must just be happy with what happens in the center of the city and on the periphery, and that we can ignore what goes beyond. No, the system, the mobility management system must be an inclusive system. We talked about the territorial design. We need to think of Strasbourg, yes, but we also need to talk about a collective territorial system, and therefore a mobility system must be applicable to the entire territory. And that is why you cannot think about mobility in a community without looking how you take into account mobility for the entire country and the entire region. And that is why it is of interest that we need international institutions like UCLG or UTP, for example, but with a different way of thinking about things that does not enclose us and that block us into the past, but that open us up towards new ways of thinking about mobility, in which space is given to those who have the majority, because that is also democracy, in which we think about planning mobility, because now we are planning for the minority. Our money is spent on the minority, and this is what we need to stop if we want to talk about the future of mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mbasi. Sure. Thank you for your contribution. Now, that is Mr. Mbasi is the final speaker. We have a couple more speaking points a little later, but we've got a few minutes now to open it up to the floor. So can I invite anyone who wishes to ask a question to do so? Put your hand up. And please, is there a roving mic? Is there a roving mic for questions? Right, great. If you want to ask a question, can you please say who you are and to whom you are asking the question, if it's just for one of the speakers. So, Any questions?
Hello.
Hi.
Good morning. I found the panel very interesting. I wasn't there the whole time, and I was wondering whether the mayors and the city officials that are there feel challenged by what the Secretary General of UCLG Africa said. Do you feel that the way that you are considering the transport systems now in your cities is too much based in the past? Is this discussion possible if we don't take into account why we are moving? I think it is very difficult nowadays, if we want to look at the future, to detach this discussion from the future of work. I think a lot of what is happening and is going to change around mobility is related to whether we will be keeping to move to work in the way that we do it now. So do you feel challenged by what the Secretary General said or not? And then I have a second question, and I don't have a preference there, but it would be for the city officials there. And the second question that I would have is about financing the kind of infrastructure that we need, the reshape that we would need in our cities. I think one of the challenges that we see cities are facing around the world is that mobility is not within the city boundaries and is not only to service the communities that live in the city, right? And however, you face the fact that you still need to finance it for a big part, this infrastructure. Is that something that you envisage different in the future?
So, who would like to start?
I think we're doing actually the opposite. We are challenging the past. We're not compromising with the past. But I think this needs to be an open conversation, not just an elitist club of mayors and technocrats and designers. So, for example, when we decided to do a huge chunk of our downtown completely car-free, we had these focus groups with parents, and then we also communicated them to the public, a big communications campaign. So the question to the focus group is, what is the most important thing in your life? And it doesn't matter whether it's Tirana, whether it's Kigali, or whether it's Tokyo or Toronto. The answer is the same. Oh, my family, of course. Then you say, if you agree that your family is the most important thing, then would you also agree that you spend most of your money to raise your kids? Oh, Mr. Mayor, don't offend me. Of course, this is a no-brainer. But then we did a calculation, and the average family was spending 30% of the income raising the car, and only 20% raising the child. And people felt shocked by this finding, because they realized that we had challenged exactly that, the past, where people would claim beliefs like family and children, but they would spend their wallet on completely other values. So they felt betrayed that someone had changed their values without asking their permission. And I think this is the type of challenge that we need to do. We need to challenge the past. And I think my take from there is that we need to, and also, you know, again, speaking of design, work is only one component, shuttling back and forth from work. So we had a big dilemma, where to build our new stadium in the city. And of course, most people, everybody who goes with the flow says, oh, let's build it out somewhere where we could drive to the stadium. We made a very tough decision, and we're opening the stadium on Sunday, but everybody's happy now. We said, no, we're going to build it in the heart of the city, so the majority of the city can easily walk. So how we design is, of course, challenging the past. We are now starting a program with the Harvard School of Design in which we say, first, all the buildings in our city are mixed use. We don't have exclusive buildings to work, which then become empty at 5 o'clock because we go to the exclusive places to sleep. And then the city becomes a dormitory, one place to sleep and one place to go and make your income. So I think city regulation can impact mobility. And what we're doing with Harvard is we're designing our master plan in such a way, and we work also with Stefano Boeri from Italy, as you know, from Bosco Verticale, in such a way that within a radius of 500 meters, most of the activity to get that family a decent life should be able to be exercised. So 500 meters from a school, from a kindergarten, from a nursery, from a pharmacy, from a bakery, from the coffee shop, from a cinema. I think if we design with this mentality that challenges the past, then we're definitely thinking of the future. And I think if we see mobility only as an exclusively explaining the mentality of the car, we're finished. I meet people all the time say, oh, Mr. Mayor, I'm stuck in traffic. No, you're not stuck in traffic. You are traffic. You're contributing to the traffic. You didn't get stuck there. It's not like someone catapulted you in traffic. You made a choice like many others. I was looking at yesterday. Many people still on rainy days, treat the car like an umbrella with wheels. What they actually need is an umbrella. But they're too lazy to think that, so they say, let's take a car because it's like an umbrella with the wheels that will take me. So I think a constant communication and challenging of the past is our best bet to win the future.
Mayor Roland.
Alors,
it's a very broad subject to be tackled, and I completely share what my friend Jean-Pierre was saying, who's not there anymore. And with regard to the framework within which the UCLG, and it's of course the same for the other organizations who work on transport, we need to be conscious of the fact that we cannot continue for very much longer on the old logic. We are going to be reaching a wall, an impasse for all kinds of reasons: congestion, pollution, the loss of attraction of our cities that are invaded by cars, all of that. In fact, we realize that, but to escape an old state, to go into a new kind of framework, it's not going to be easy. And I said it earlier, in the 1990s when we launched a tramway in Strasbourg, I have rooms full of people, 500, 600 people. They were all hostile, and I mentioned the reasons earlier on, and I'm not going to come back to it. And the change is inevitable, and it's become urgent. I'm going to give you an example. We are setting up in Strasbourg what we call a ZFE. So it's a low emission zone. It means that from year to year we are going to reduce or limit cars that are the most polluting to come into the cities, and progressively the most polluting cars will not be able to come into the cities anymore. But the most polluting cars, of course, belong to the poorest of citizens who do not have the means. So are we going to be going towards cities where only the rich will have the possibility to drive because they would have new cars that have low emissions? Or are we going to try to find solutions where everybody will have a solution and where nobody will be left behind, including those who have the most difficulty or the most trouble? We have reached that level. We cannot continue as we did in the past. But for the new to appear, the old must disappear. So the old must disappear, and that is the most difficult today. And we cannot do it without the consent of everybody. Right, old beliefs need to be transformed, and we need to talk about public transport and bicycles and walking and carpooling, etc. All of the possibilities to reduce congestion and pollution. It's easy to say, but we need to do it. We now need to do it. We need to really start focusing on it. And the UCLG has an important role to play in there, of course, with all the professionals and the organizations, UTP, etc. Right, you have all the equivalents around the world, but it's a planet-wide problem. We cannot continue like this. We can't continue to do what we are currently doing, and the earlier we change collectively with the agreement of citizens, the better it is. That is why I think that our committee of practice, in fact, needs to develop this thinking so that we can really tackle this problem all together in our diversity, but with a common objective goal, and which is to have an urban, peri-urban, sustainable development that is sustainable, that is right. There's work to be done, of course, but I know we will do it. And here we have a declaration. Ah, you have it as well, I see. Right, I think these declarations were actually distributed at the entrance, and this text is not final. You can't just, it can be amended, it's not cast in stone, and you can let us know, of course, we can modify the text, but it would be good to have this manifesto and to have this municipal declaration, to have the right to mobility, and to have also sustainable transport. And we would, at the end of these days of conference, we need to be able to have a reference, a document of reference, to have a common denominator for our respective actions in across the world.
Thank you, Mayor Roland. Can you tell us, you may have mentioned it, I missed it, but when will that be signed and finalised? You can do it now. Do you want my pen?
Excusez-moi, j'ai pas...
The gentleman hasn't understood the question. Can you repeat?
About this process. So, I mean, if you want to finish up the discussion, and I can pick it up in the final comments.
I think that's a good thing. I think we've pretty much run out of time, so
Right.
can I invite you,
Absolutely.
Mrs. Sayers, would you like to come up to speak from here?
Well, no, thank you very much. I think they deserve all the credit, and so I'm just coming, and I am very pleased to have been listening to this interesting discussion. But I wanted to make sure that we left the message as organization about our commitment in this transformation of mobility, the transformation of the concept. Our partnership with UITP has been very, very important, because not only do we feel that we are influencing the policy of this very ancient organization in matters of transportation and mobility in general, but also in the political perspective that it entails. And I think that is what is going to make this challenging the past a reality if we work on it together. And so what we are trying to do is to link the discussion of mobility to other aspects of the development model transformation. We think that mobility is extremely critical, like our deputy mayor from Italy was presenting. It has a great impact in inclusion, in equality, but also in local economic development, in the quality of life, even in health and so many other issues. And so for us, mobility is a very critical topic. It's also a topic that defines our territories and the cohesion between them. And so we want to move it up front in the agenda. I think our co-president, the mayor of Strasbourg, is totally right. We will need to challenge the past indeed, but we will need to do it with everybody, and that entails a type of discussion that we are probably not having. Let us remember Chile just for a moment. What has happened in Chile was triggered, the big revolt was triggered because of making the metro ticket a little bit more expensive. That's what it triggered. This is what we are talking about. Let's not be naive about it. And so our organization, we feel, has a responsibility to open up the spaces to have this kind of discussion a little bit detached from the domestic affairs, and to find the best way, the best methodology to actually put this kind of conversation in motion. Having learned from other experiences and then applying it to the local reality. Two other points that I would like to make. We will need to change the dialogue. I was saying it in another session with the private sector, because the producers of transportation mechanisms, be it a car or be it a tram or be it a bicycle, play a very big role in the things that cities can't do and what they need to buy in order to make the transformation. And for instance, in the example that the mayor of Tirana was putting on electrical vehicles, I know for a fact that for most of the Global South, this is an extremely expensive affair. And the vehicles that are being produced are not fit for purpose in this part of the world. The offer that is being made is extremely difficult. I know for a fact that, I'm sorry, the colleague from Mexico left, but they are trying to do this and they are not able to find the right provider for this, because the cars that they are being provided and the other machinery that they are being provided is exactly the same that you would be selling to a much wealthier place up north. And so that type of conversation with private sector will need to change, and I think we need to take that on board as well. Just as we lobby the United Nations or the international financing institutions to change the way that they are financing things, we need to establish this conversation, hopefully in partnership with our international partners, with the bigger private sector around this. And then the third point on this statement, well, we call it a manifesto. Every special session of this gathering is not only a conference exchange, but is meant to trigger policy development in our organization. So every single special session like this one has produced a manifesto that is going to be put through to our governing bodies. It will be adopted as such. I'm sure they will be evolved, but they will be marking our narrative on these topics, and not only that, our action around these topics, our work plan at global and hopefully at regional, national and local level. And so we do very much hope that you have a look at it. We are going to be presenting it to, it has already been distributed. It has been distributed to our membership as a whole. We do have the opportunity to make changes, but what I would do is invite you, if you have any urgent issues that you would like to change, you can find the UCLG World Secretariat staff, and I don't know where Massimo is. Are you here? Massimo is the mobility man at the World Secretariat, and we can adapt this a little bit. The most important thing, however, is just to accept the general views of this, to make sure that this fits into our general policy and that we start working on it and its implementation through our community of practice, through our champion community that we are driving. It would be part and parcel of the outcome documents that will be adopted as a whole on Friday evening upon closure. So I hope that clarifies, and if you have any specific questions, then please, Massimo, my mobility man. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Sayers. We have definitely run out of time, so can I just take this opportunity to thank all of the speakers for their contribution, extremely stimulating, a wide range of perspectives and a wide range of factors to consider when we think about inclusion and sustainable mobility. So thank you all, and please show your appreciation of the speakers.
Thank you very much. Just before we close the session, I want to thank also Mayor McCall for the very good moderation. I would like also to tell you that we have on the 14th of November, you find it on this small flyer called Mobility Matters, because mobility matters indeed. On the 14th of November in the Lab for All, a session, special session on creative mobilities. And as you saw Massimo here, there is also the possibility for those of you that want to speak more about the community of practice and are interested to see what are the next steps during the Congress, then you can, of course, speak with Massimo and Quentin, which is just there. They are at your disposal to speak more about what are the next steps of this community of practice. Thank you very much.